This is a very special evening, very special topic, and a very special speaker. Tonight's topic is called Escape from Cairo, but it really could be called Understanding the Soul of Hate, or how hate is transformed into love. Because tonight's story is really about understanding what is at the core of anti-Israel and anti-Jewish sentiment in the Middle East, but also really understanding one man's journey from hate to love, from a place of anti-Semitism to a place of embracing Jews and the land of Israel. Of course, we know that in very recently with the war between Israel and Gaza and Hamas, we know that a lot of tensions have once again come to the surface. It's also been ever apparent that what goes on in Israel has a direct effect on Jews around the world, with anti-Semitic actions and attacks taking place in various countries, including the United States of America. And so I feel that, when all this was going on, I felt that it's very important that we have this event here that we're having tonight, to understand better what is the dynamic and how perhaps we can create more dialogue and more understanding so that we get to the ultimate goal, which is peace and acceptance and tolerance and appreciating diversity, etc. So our guest speaker tonight, his name is Hussein Aboubakr Mansour. And if I mispronounce your name, please forgive me. I'm sure rabbis don't always do a great job. But Hussein grew up in Cairo, in Egypt. And he is going to share his story going from a space of, from an environment of anti-Jewish, anti-Israel rhetoric to discovering a different truth. It's a very important story, very important in our lives, just to understand what is going on and how we can be part of a solution that is good for everyone. So without further ado, I'd like to ask all of us to give a warm virtual welcome to Hussein Mansour.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rabbi, for having me speaking to your community. It's a great pleasure and honor. And thank you, everybody, for being here today. It's really a pleasure to speak to this congregation. As you heard from the Rabbi, my name is Hussein Aboubakr Mansour. I currently work as an educator for Stand With Us, educating community members and students on campuses, high schools all over the country, about the Middle East, about the issues of anti-Semitism, and about Israel. And before that, I actually worked as a Hebrew teacher for quite some time, about 6 years, at the Defense Language Institute in Monterey, California. And before that, I was in Egypt, because that's actually where I come from. And I mean, that's where we all come from, I guess. I was from Egypt. I was born in 1989, lived there all my life, and I only moved to the United States in 2012. Now, how did an Egyptian, Hussein, from an Arab Muslim background, end up being a Hebrew teacher and educator at a Jewish organization? How did a Hussein end up with such a resume in Jewish education? That's a story that everybody wants to hear. And the truth is that I didn't get to where I am today, or my journey did not start with admiration or curiosity or love at all. It actually started with intense hatred. I used to hate Jews and Israel intensely and passionately, more than anything else in the world. And somehow I ended up doing, my life changed so much that everything in it that got transformed, that I ended up being a great friend. I like to think of myself as a great friend of the Jewish people and of Israel. So that's the story that I'm going to share. And how did this happen? So as I said, in 1989, I was born in 1989 to an average middle-class Arab Muslim family in Cairo, Egypt. There was nothing extraordinary about my childhood. Very traditional family. My father was an accountant. My mother was like any observant Muslim woman. She stayed home to raise the kids and feed them well. A job very obviously well done. And I received my education like everybody else from school, from the community members, from mosques, from the TV, from the cartoons, from just the primary sources of um, socialization that every individual gets exposed to. And those early sources and primary sources of socialization really stay with you forever. Literally, they become everything because they give you the story of your identity, who you are, they give you the language, they give you the cultural personality, and so on. The earliest year are the most consequential in the life of any human. And I received all the narratives that gave me a sense of identity. I received it then. I'm Egyptian, I'm Arab, I'm Muslim. But there was another part that really stood out to me more than anything else. And that part went like this, that in this world, the world's not boring. There are supervillains. There is evil in this world. Um, and this evil is represented by a cosmic supervillain that constantly conspires to control the world, dominate history. They control all the banks, all the politics, all the financial institutions. And that supervillain is the Jew, and the embodiment of that Jewish villainy is the state of Israel, those dirty Zionist pigs who want to kill Palestinian children and drink their blood. And that narrative, I heard it over and over and over. I heard it in cartoons, I saw it on TV, I heard it in mosques, I heard it in schools. It was just something that literally quite everybody believed in it. And I wasn't even aware it existed because it was like fish in water. That's how the world is. It just becomes a basic part of almost the fabric of reality. The sun comes out of the east, the earth is round sometimes, and the Jews are evil. And that's how it is. And you learn that from a very early age. And like everybody else, I learned it. The best TV shows had Jewish villains. The best movies had Jewish villains. The Jews are just the complete. They are the archetypal representation of evil, the epitome of all wickedness. And I actually loved those stories because if you think about a child, we explain reality to children through fairy tales. And there's a reason that we do that. It's just because of the imagination of children, the ability of children to identify with fairy tales. So anti-Semitism as a fairy tale is actually quite attractive. I actually was obsessed with it. It's like living in Lord of the Rings. Oh my God, there are supervillains, there are orcs, there is a kingdom of evil that's called Israel, and they have this weird writing that looks like sorcery. And they are evil, and you can become a superhero by fighting them. Who wouldn't want to live? What kind of child wouldn't like this fantasy? That's literally what Nickelodeon and Disney make. It's a fantasy about good and evil, and I loved it. I was obsessed with it. I used to read very anti-Semitic comic books, which are fortunately easy to get in a place like Cairo. I remember this book series. It was called The Man of the Impossible. Hundreds of them about kind of a Muslim superhero who's foiling Jewish conspiracies all over the world. I was just obsessed with those stories. Now, after 2001, things got significantly worse. After 2001, several things happened. You had 9/11, the beginning of the war on terror, the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan, and of course the second Intifada. And I think most likely most of you remember what the second Intifada was like. There were terrorist attacks every other day in restaurants, buses, and of course on Al Jazeera, it's not called a terrorist attacks. it's a heroic operation of martyrs against the Zionist entity, and so on. So I remember that period. You had, as I said, Iraq, Afghanistan, the Second Intifada. The TV was just inflammatory. Go to the mosque and sensations are high. Muslims are under attack and are being murdered by Jews and Christians and Americans. And it was just a huge wave of radicalization for a lot of people, which I think actually was quite consequential. If you really think about it and do the math, you'll find that it was exactly my generation. Those who were early teenagers during that time are the ones who grew up for the Arab Spring and ISIS, pretty much. So that period was actually a period of significant radicalization, given the rise of global jihadism, Al Qaeda, Second Intifada, and the terrible role that Al Jazeera played and continues to play in the Middle East. So I ended up actually going to a very radical mosque. I really bought into all of this. I wanted to become a hero. I wanted to help fighting the evil Jews. And I found one of those radical mosques. I went to mosque 5 times a day. I became very zealous, and I wanted to do something. I wanted to do something more in order to fight those evil Jews. I was also a nerd. I mean, I am still a nerd. And I wanted to do something nerdy. So I decided to actually teach myself the dark language of Mordor, that is Hebrew, that evil sorcery language that looks terrifying. And that way I can, know what the Jews tell each other. I can know what they are up to, and it can help in this amazing cosmic struggle between good and evil. And the internet was just really picking, high-speed internet was just really, picking up in Egypt then. I was 14. I started going online and trying to teach myself Hebrew, try to find anything about Jews, Jewish culture, about Israel, Jewish history. And I ended up discovering that I do have a knack for languages. I taught myself English and Hebrew to fluency. And in a matter of a few years, I was starting to read very different stories about the ones that I grew up listening to. I started to read narratives that couldn't be more different. The story of the Jewish people as this indigenous Middle Eastern nation that comes from the land of Israel, that was persecuted, hated, murdered, expelled century after century, country after country, couldn't be more different than the story of the Jewish supervillain that pretty much controls the flow of history itself. It couldn't be more different. It's not that one of them is right and one is wrong. It's just the contrast is so sharp that it requires like a whole explanation on its own. How could the same issue have such a very, very different explanations or narratives? I started learning about the Holocaust and the terrible disease that's called anti-Semitism that truly destroys entire civilizations and entire societies from the inside out and creates the most horrific human incidences or human atrocities. And I remember discovering, oh my God, anti-Semitism, I know what that is. I live in it. It was absolutely shocking, and it was quite depressing to discover that what you thought was your identity, what you thought was your reality, was nothing but a fantasy. Depressing is also an understatement. Anti-Semitism, unfortunately, for extremely complex, unfortunate historical events, became a pillar of identity, and for a lot of people in the Middle East. And this is why this has been very, very tough to deal with. If you identify yourself through hating Jews, that's a tough one to beat. My world was collapsing, truly. I lost faith in everything. Myself, the people around me, my parents, my teachers, all the adults. I discovered, what is this? I'm living pretty much in a Disney movie. It's really hard to describe how difficult of a time that was. But I remember I was reading 1984, the great book by George Orwell at the time, and he had that great line in it that helped me a lot. He said, paraphrasing, but you're never crazy even if you're a minority of one. And that's how it felt. Okay, I'm a minority of one. because nobody was talking about this. The issue of hating Israel and Jews, it was, especially earlier. Now there are changes, but it was an issue of absolute consensus. That means if you get somebody in Egypt, if you get somebody with an Islamic orientation, and somebody with a who's secular orientation, and somebody who's a leftist Arab nationalist, and a Marxist, and an Egyptian liberal, this is pretty much going to be the only issue that they completely agree on. It's just Israel evil. Israel needs to be eradicated. Um, so I was the ideas that I was thinking, the fact that I was starting to look at Israel very differently, made me immediately alienated me from pretty much everybody. It was very hard, really, to accept all of this. And I remember when I was looking at Israel, I at the beginning I also expected mirroring. I expected that Israelis would be teaching their kids, similar things that things that I was taught. But then I discovered that's not true. Israeli Jews don't teach their children that Arabs are your eternal enemies till the end of days, and you will have to kill them all and take all of the land. Um, and I discovered the huge moral gap between Israel and other societies in the region, and that made me believe in Israel even more. But I didn't know what to do with all of this. I was maybe 18 at the time. I was finishing high school, going to college. I decided that I wanted to learn what I'm passionate about. Now, I was my obsession, my anti-Semitic obsession with Jews had turned into a healthy curiosity, and I wanted to learn more about Jews. There are Hebrew and Jewish studies programs at Cairo University, so I joined with a lot of excitement. I'm going to learn more. To only discover that what professors at Egyptian universities teach about the subject is only a more elaborate version of the lay anti-Semitism that you can find in the street. The Protocols of Zion, the Mein Kampf books. The Jews are inferior genetically. They are genocidal people across their history. Just things that are uh, just pure, crass, vulgar, the regular anti-Semitism, but a more flourishing language that they pass in the university, and that went or caused me to go from a state of sadness really to anger. I was angry when I discovered that the elites, the experts, the intellectuals, the professors who should know better are responsible for all of this hatred. And this is a problem that I discovered with anti-Semitism in general. I think anti-Semitism is actually primarily an intellectual problem. There is, I think, an uneducated form of anti-Semitism, but I think anti-Semitism can always be traced to intellectual elites in any society. Just the complexity of the anti-Semitic ideas and the anti-Semitic abstractions, because anti-Semitism is extremely abstract and abstracts people to a very high degree. I don't think that hillbillies can do this. I think anti-Semitism starts from extremely intellectual people, and people with high intellectual capacities are able to formulate this kind of very high abstractions of anti-Semitism. And that's what I found in Egyptian universities, really. Um, but still, I was a minority of one. I didn't know what to do. And then I had this crazy idea that I wanted to meet an Israeli. I wanted to actually meet Jews. Till that point in my life, I've never met any Jew, any Israeli. So I found out that there was something called the Israeli Academic Center in Cairo. It doesn't exist anymore, unfortunately. But it was there then, part of the Israeli embassy. Egyptians were not supposed to visit it, but I said, you know what, I'll go visit it anyway. If somebody asks me, I'll say, well, I'm studying Hebrew and they needed some books. So I actually went there and I met the first Israeli I ever met, and the first Jew, which was the actually only security guard who was in the building, because there was nothing else. It was a security guard who was guarding books, which is great. Okay, so I got the security guard, spoke to him in Hebrew, and then, went in and they picked the books I wanted, and I was very happy. And stepping out of the building, I found myself stopped by Egyptian state security. That's the equivalent of the NSA or the FBI in the United States. And they started interrogating me. What books did I take? who did I talk to there? Who's up there? Why did I come to an Israeli place to begin with? Didn't I know that we should boycott or Egyptians are banned from being here? Eventually, he let me go, and I thought, me studying Hebrew in an Egyptian university would be a sufficient excuse. But then I get a phone call a week later with a lot of threats from the Egyptian security, um, that I need to stop studying Hebrew, I need to stop my excitement or my interest in Israel, and that, or I will get what I deserve, and so on. Um, and I was extremely terrified at the time. I was young. This was happening when I was 20, and I didn't know what to do. In Egypt, we're talking about a country with a very, very bad human rights record that all Egyptians know of, um, and very problematic ways in dealing with dissidents and so on. But yet, I also got I had another crazy idea, which is going online, opening a blog, and writing about this, which I did. And then next thing I know, it get picked up by Ynet. Ynet then was the largest Israeli news outlet. That was before the Times of Israel and before all of it. It was just really Ynet.co.il. And then this article gets published. An Egyptian student in Egypt who's excited, who's interested in Israel, is getting harassed by the Egyptian authority and getting threatened. Um, After the article came out on Ynet, the next day, state security were at my house. They arrested me. They arrested my father. They took us to an interrogation facility. How dare you speak to those Zionist pigs? How dare you speak to those Zionist dogs? Um, my family had no idea before then about what I was doing with my life, really. They knew I was studying for college and I was being a good student, but they had no idea what I was up to. Um, after a day of interrogations and me apologizing, and my father apologizing and saying they're sorry, the Zionists must have brainwashed him and so on, they let us go. And then my family had an intervention, about what's wrong with you. And I just told them everything I thought. I really didn't believe a lot of those things anymore, and I didn't want to practice religion. I don't want this, and of course that was very hard for them to hear. So they decided to disown me, and that was extremely difficult. That was in 2010. And soon after that, I was arrested by the Egyptian military intelligence on the suspicion that I was a Mossad agent, a Zionist spy. It's just a whole list of ludicrous charges that don't even make sense. And the craziest thing, when I first got arrested that time, it sounded like a big joke. Like, here I am, I'm like 20, 21. I'm a nerd, pretty much. And then I'm getting arrested for being kind of a double O Muhammad, who's an Israeli spy living in Egypt. So for me, for the first 2 days, it was unreal. Like, I'm sure that all of you have been in a situation like this when something just completely outlandish happens, and you take a while till you actually realize, oh, this is actually happening. And it turned very quickly into a terrible nightmare. 2 months and a half in the military intelligence. And the craziest thing that I actually felt they did actually suspect that. They were that paranoid. They were not that misinformed. They were that obsessive. They actually believed the propaganda they create. The Egyptian government create propaganda that they end up believing it. It's, as I said, it was a very difficult 2 months and a half. I was beaten every day because I'm a Jew lover who works for the Zionists. Eventually, of course, they didn't find anything, and they discovered, I don't know what they discovered, but they decided to release me in December 2010. A month later, the Arab Spring starts. Exactly a month later, actually. The Arab Spring starts. I participated in the Arab Spring, especially that I was very angry also at the time because what just had happened. There was a lot of hope at the beginning. There was a reason they called it the Arab Spring. Everybody thought finally Arab democracy. And I was very excited. I was in Tahrir Square in Cairo. I was very happy when President Mubarak was removed. But soon after, the Muslim Brotherhood, they start coming to power. Muslim Brotherhood is extremely dangerous. movement, um, and they start coming to power in Egypt. Everything gets worse. Anti-Semitism gets worse. Violence against the Christian minority gets worse. And then they start utilizing the same tactics and tools of the previous regime. And I found myself being contacted again by Egyptian security, uh, fired from my job, and being threatened with prison again if I ever continue being interested in Israel or talking to people about Israel or anti-Semitism. And that's when I decided maybe it's the best time for me to leave. And my friends helped me. And um, I was able to leave Cairo early in 2012 and come to the United States and receive political asylum. And it was an extremely difficult journey. Especially, I knew nobody in America. I never thought about leaving Egypt before then. All of a sudden, I found myself having to flee, and I ended up in the United States. It took me a while till I knew what to do. I slept in the streets for like 2 months. I didn't know anybody. I had nothing but $700, which my friends gave me, and my flight ticket. But this is an absolutely great country. Um, I ended up really rebuilding a lot of my life. Not all of it, not the family part, but rebuilding a lot of my life. And I ended up doing a lot of the things that I wanted to do. I ended up not just speaking Hebrew, I ended up actually teaching Hebrew. Um, I ended I ended up having a lot of Israeli and Jewish friends and being in countless Shabbat dinners, and complaining obsessively about how terrible gefilte fish is and how opinionated Jews are, and just sharing truly a life of friendship with many of my Jewish family and friends, which I feel is the greatest blessings that I have, that really God gave me in life, which is the ability to cross all of those boundaries and enjoy the human companionship and the friendships of so many different people. And the saddest thing is that my other family in Egypt can't really enjoy that, and they don't know that they can, um, or they don't know that they should, or that they may, or that they are allowed to. And because of that, um, it's my main work, or my main mission is to try to combat anti-Semitism, because I realize how destructive it is. And I do it, I meet a lot of Jews and they know what I do, and like, oh my God, you're great, thank you. Thank you, I'm not that great. I'm really doing it for very selfish reasons. Anti-Semitism is awful. It is destructive for everybody, for in any society. It's just history. I mean, how many times would we like to try it? We've already tried it over and over and over and over. Whenever anti-Semitism really starts to gain grounds in society, it's usually the canary in the coal mine, and that society is heading to a terrible future. And and that's why I truly care about this. And of course, I care because I do care about the Jewish people, because it's unbelievable the amount of historical injustice that Jewish people suffered from the past. And they are suffering today in terms of how their culture is being portrayed, how Israel is being scrutinized and scapegoated for all of the sins of the world. Even today in the West, I feel like Israel is being offered as a sacrifice, for all the sins of Western history. Um, and this just absolute madness that keeps happening just needs to stop. I also believe that Israel has the right to exist. Not just that I believe that Israel has the right to exist. I believe that for Israel to exist is profoundly a good thing for both Jews and Arabs and the entire world. I believe that Israel is a good live all around Israel. It's an opportunity to build something together as Jews and Arabs, and try to work on making the Middle East much better for so many people, and try to try to help alleviate a lot of the suffering in the region due to the political instability and the violence and the terrorism, and so on. Um, it's actually rare in life that people that somebody would actually have a crazy idea and act on it, but actually then start seeing that it actually may be coming true. When I started thinking about all of this and doing all of this over 10 years ago, I was completely alone. Today, things are different. Last year, Israel signed, as you know, peace and normalization agreements with many Arab countries, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Sudan, Morocco. There are many Arabs now who are starting to openly be pro-Israel and defend Israel. Not a lot, not millions, but there is a sizable number that I can see. There are people in the Arab media who are saying maybe we're wrong about this. There are people in the Arab media who are saying no, actually Iran is the real danger that we all should be afraid of. There are Arabs who are standing with Israel against Hamas. And it's just absolutely amazing to see how much potential there is and that change is possible. At the end and after this, we're going to have a Q&A. I'll be more than happy to take any questions you have. I'd like to say the reason I'm sharing this story is to let you know that, yes, anti-Semitism exists. It's more terrifying than than most what Jewish people think. I've met a lot of Jews and they discovered that actually most of them has no idea how anti-Semitism really looks like internally on the other side, or how bad it is. It's really bad. It kidnaps people. It turns people into something akin to zombies. People who are totally living in fantasy. They're full humans, but their mind has been hijacked by this parasite that just destroys their way of thinking. But it's not the end. It's possible for people to change. I changed. It happened to me in my own life. It's absolutely possible. It was painful. It was not something easy. It was something that's incredibly difficult, but something that made my life much better. And the only way to do that is through education. There is no other way around. And Judaism itself understood that very long time ago. And it's actually, as a culture and as a religion, has an unbelievable emphasis, more than any other culture. And I'm not Jewish, I'm not converting, so I'm not really trying to, but this is really my objective opinion, that Judaism disproportionately, compared to every other culture and civilization, has this huge emphasis on education. The Jews are literally dubbed the people of the book. It's the first culture in the world to be organized around a book, around an object of studying. Judaism is the only culture that I know of in the history that has its primary rite of passage from childhood to adulthood, becoming a full member of the community through the act of acquiring literacy. Judaism has this huge emphasis on education, and this amazingly wise construction is due to the fact that the Jewish wisdom understood that it's education, it's learning, it's studying, and it's dedication to the word, dedication to argument, is the only way that we can maybe get closer to the truth. That's very hard to get to. And this is why I do what I do with Stand With Us, because I believe it's very important to try to educate people as much as we can. Thank you for listening to me. I'll be more than happy to take any questions you have.
Hussein, thank you so much. Powerful presentation. I have been writing down questions that I have. I have a whole list of questions, but I do want to first open it up to our community. I'm sure you have questions. So this is now open. You can unmute and ask questions.
Well, I have a question, Rabbi Sollish.
Yeah, go ahead, Marjan.
The teacher always has the questions, right?
Yes.
Hussein, I was wondering, my family is from Iran, and very similar stories that unfortunately still happening there.
Yeah.
what you shared in the beginning about all the lies told, it's the same exact thing. The kids are still watching the school there on a daily basis.
Yeah.
So I'm thankful to be here. I'm thankful to be teaching a Jewish school and trying to do my part in getting this to the next level, hopefully. But what I struggle with is I feel that those of us from countries that have this thing that's anti-Israel, like I am going to be in exile for the rest of my life, that there is no such a thing as being proud of my Iranian heritage at the same time being Jewish. And, you know, when I read the Bible, I feel like I'm in a desert in Israel, and I feel like I'm too old to be there. Should I know by now? There's this wonderful Jewish community who's welcoming me, but at the same time, I wonder if the suffering goes on and on and on because we've chosen to try to correct some of the wrong. How do you feel about that?
Wow, you're asking a tough question. I don't know. I don't have answers, by the way. I just have my story. I don't know if I have any answers. I mean, those questions are really, there are questions that you can find in the Tanakh itself. Is it always going to be this way? Are good people always going to suffer, and bad people, the path of the wicked will always be successful? I really don't know, but I don't see any other way but to have hope and believe in tomorrow and just keep doing what we're doing. I don't know if it will work out in our lifetime or work out in our kids' lifetimes, but there's no other way. We have to believe that no, we can fight this, we can do better, and we can try. I'm from Egypt. All my family are Muslim, or my nieces or nephews. I refuse to give up on them. I'll just keep trying because they are my family, and I am one of them. I did it, so I know it's doable. It is possible, and I will just keep doing it. And you also have to keep doing it for yourself and for your kids and for your community, because as I said, it's all our best interest to just push away all the lies and the fantasies about what reality really is, and try to really see the world for what it really is, not what we're fantasizing. I think you should be proud of your Iranian heritage. I think one of the most amazing strengths and benefits of the Jewish life is the ability of Jews to be Jews, yet bring different parts of the world of human cultures together. And you see that in Israel, which is quite magnificent. You see people who are from Iran, people from Iraq, people from Egypt, people from Poland, people from Germany, people from Russia. You see people from Ethiopia, and they are all coming together, and they all bringing all of those different parts to Israel and to Judaism. So, in my opinion, it's something that that you can be proud of, and I hope that Iran. Listen, the Islamic Republic of Iran is not going to last forever, because nothing does really.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not going to last forever, and who knows for how long it's going to last. And I actually have a lot of hope for Iran. When I meet Iranian people, even not just Jews, and in the United States, you run into Iranians, your Uber driver, your accountant or something, and they strike me as brilliant people, truly, truly brilliant. And sometimes it baffles me. Wow, they are honestly, they're smarter than I feel as an Arab. I can say that they're smarter than a lot of Arabs. How did they get themselves in this situation? And I really have a lot of hopes that when the Islamic Republic finally will go away, we're going to see an Iran that is much better, much more enlightened, and that can be actually a friend and a partner for Israel in making the region better. So that's my hope, and that's what I'm working towards. But as for what's going to happen tomorrow, only Hashem knows.
Then how do you deal with your own homesickness with all this happening?
Yeah, I just have to deal with it. I mean, it's something. Everything comes at a price, and I chose this, and this is the price that I have to pay. But it's very rewarding. I think I'm very lucky. Not everybody is lucky in life to find something worth doing, and worth paying a price for. And I think I was lucky that I was born in a place where there's very little truth, and I was able to realize that. So God kind of gave it to me easy. All right, here's your chance, and I'm trying to take it.
Beautiful. Thank you. That was a great conversation, and I feel very very lucky to have been able to listen to that. Thank you both for sharing. A question came up in the chat. I want to. There's two questions that I'm going to read, and then we're going to open it back up to live questions. So one question that's asked is about anti-Semitism before 1948. If you have knowledge of that in Egypt or in other Arab countries before 1948, were there comic books as prevalent, or was the rhetoric the same? It seems like Jews that left or fled Egypt look back on their life there with fondness. Was there this kind of Jew hatred then, or was it a bit of a different thing? And was it 1948 that kind of brought that up? What's your understanding of that?
That's an excellent question. So anti-Semitism, there was a form of anti-Semitism that existed prior to modern time. Let's just not say 1948. Let's say the entrance of modernity in the Middle East, kind of. Pre-modern times, of course, there was a form of anti-Semitism, but it was definitely way more benign than European anti-Semitism. That's historically proven. That is, that Jews lived as second-class citizens. Now, if you're really talking about the 10th century, that's progressive. For the minority to have even a status that's even close to something of the sort of a second-class citizen 1,000 years ago, that would have been really progressive, which actually really was. And this is why you had the Jews of Muslim Spain really thriving and creating a very thriving, Hebraic culture and philosophical culture and Talmudic culture. It's because that really it was quite progressive for its time. But it was a second-class citizen. You had restrictions, you had so on, but it was things you could live to. It was not the genocidal insanity that Europe had known, or that we see today in a lot of the Middle East, the rhetoric in Iran, for example. This kind of obsessional anti-Semitism, erotic, completely genocidal anti-Semitism, existed in Europe. It took a sharp turn with the modernization, or kind of the secularization of the Christian anti-Semitism. And we saw this in the philosophy of the Enlightenment and the German nationalism. And that's actually what came to the Middle East, starting from the 19th century, the second half of 19th century, with colonial powers, Europeans arriving to the Middle East, missionary schools. They started bringing a lot of this, but it was really Arab nationalism that started bringing the entire philosophical system of Western anti-Semitism, because Arab nationalism, and this is not speculation, this is really just the truth of how it happened. Arab nationalism was completely modeled after German nationalism. That is, the Arab intellectuals who wanted to create something called Arab nationalism, they were looking for the Bismarck of the Arabs, the Prussia of the Arabs. This is the writings. I actually read a lot of this a lot in order to figure out what happened. So they imported the entire German philosophy by Arabizing it. And that way they were able to actually, unfortunately, import that kind of madness that we know from German nationalism. So you're right to notice that, yeah, the 20th century Arab anti-Semitism became completely different, but it's really started since before 1948, the end of 19th century specifically. But with 1948, that really took a very center stage, especially that Arab nationalism also became state ideology for many actual states: Syria, Iraq, Egypt, and so on.
Interesting. And this is my own question, just an addendum to that. Is there a Jewish community currently in Egypt and Cairo that you're aware of?
I know that there are very few individuals, mostly very senior women, who are probably, we're talking about this is the last decade for any Egyptian Jews to be living in Egypt.
Okay. All right. Let me ask you another question that came in through the chat, and then we're going to open it back up to the live to those that are we'll ask people to unmute and ask their questions. So question is coming in is, do you speak with non-Jewish groups such as US-based Muslim groups? And do you see a window of opportunity for Tikkun Olam with these conversations?
I do speak to a lot. I mostly speak to non-Jewish groups, but not specifically. Most of them I speak on campuses because of the campus problems that Stand With Us have been very active in dealing with. So in high schools and on campuses, so just the students in general. For Muslims, it's been happening actually more often lately. So that's something I'm very happy with, but not really going to a Muslim group specifically. I don't think that this is happening anytime soon. But finding Muslims more coming to the audience, interested in these conversations, or young Muslims who understand the issue of or understand that there is an issue in the community with anti-Semitism, and they want to know how to deal with it. So this also has been very important. Actually, this last week, I was with. I met a few people from the Emirates and Bahrain, and we talked about this issue specifically, normalizing with Israel and accepting Israel. So I don't speak to specifically, I don't go to mosques and speak. We're not quite there yet, but hopefully we're getting there.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, and thank you for that answer. I will just say personally from this event, we promoted it on various channels through our, our email list, our community list, but as well as on Facebook. And there was, I wouldn't say an overwhelming amount of hate, but there was enough that was, it surprised me even how much hate there was. We positioned this event as all about, moving from hate to acceptance and tolerance and dialogue, about going from a place of like intolerance to a place of tolerance, right? It wasn't about like, everyone's got to be, whatever, but, and still that evoked, and I worked, on the back end of the Facebook post to delete messages that were very, like super ugly and extremely threatening and whatever, to remove those and report those. But like, it seemed like, I'm just saying anecdotally, it seems like going directly to a mosque might be a challenge given the sentiment that's going on. So I can appreciate your answer. Let me jump back into the group here and see if anyone has a question. Questions, please jump in. Yaacov.
Hussein. So Hussein, you identified yourself as a nerd growing up. Yeah, I don't see that. Nerds are generally, they maybe been beaten up a little bit, a little cowardly nature. They have a little bit of, power, and then they'll stab you in the back real fast. Yeah, I don't see that. So I just ask, were you absolutely crazy going in public with your research and with your, your stance? Did you? So that's the first question. Why didn't you try to do it a little bit more in a little bit more safe manner instead of just so visible where you literally could have been killed? I mean, so easily, I would think. And then, back to the Persian thing. I see the self-flagellation. I see these guys that they are, man, I admire them. They are such believers. They have such fervor and they have such faith. And I think part of this struggle is they know that world, that world is being threatened by the secular Western model. It's taking over everything. Why don't we just flood the Gaza Strip with all the McDonald's and Tasty Creams and ice cream and just, pollute them with video games and everything, and like they'll be just like us. But then I thought it was secular versus the old school spirit. But what I see in this country is I see just the old racism, and it's those same people. They think they're going to lose control. They think that, women are a threat, brown people are a threat, Arab people are a threat, just anybody except these old white men or ignorant people are a threat. And yet, you had comments going on Facebook. So, maybe it's not just ignorant people, maybe it's zealous people, religious Jews, religious Arabs. So, you know, those, I guess I'm just posing a few different types of questions. I'm trying to figure out if you have a beat on really what's driving people's fears, because obviously, you know, hatred is a fear. It's a fear of something, and they don't want anything. I mean, when we gave back Gaza Strip, we also gave back multi-million-dollar greenhouses that they just exploded and destroyed. I mean, they could have had these things. They were very valuable. So they just want to destroy. So I don't know what they're so scared of. You know, why the Arabs are so scared of Jews, or why people are so scared of Jews. If you have any thoughts on that.
Thank you.
And thank
you. About your first question. Yeah, of course I was reckless. I was young when I did a lot of this. Definitely there was a lot of naivety, but it worked out, and I'm here. So thank God. And somebody has to start, you know, and I hope what I do is kind of helps to lower the cost on this kind of speaking up for others, and people who come after me. You know how it is, economics. I love economics. I explain a lot of things. So I hope, by me doing this, just kind of lowers the cost a little bit. About the hate, and you know, hate is a very complicated thing. It's really, it's really hard to speak about it. I mean, a lot of this conversation, you know, it's going to be philosophical, religious, psychoanalysis. I don't know if we can argue that the problem are that those people are religious, or we can also argue that they are not religious enough.
Right.
And that's something I've been thinking about. People like Hamas, who claim to be the people of Allah and the people of God, and they do everything for God. Well, if you really are ready to sacrifice, you know, your child to the last drop of blood for the sake of land or honor, are you really worshiping God, or are you really worshiping land? Are you really just not reliving the Canaanite paganism of the past, that you're sacrificing every human life needed in order for you to, that's really the opposite of the story of Abraham, for example, who God demanded his absolute obedience, and then his first command was not to sacrifice a child. And you see those things, and then you ask, well, maybe Hamas's problem is not that they are religious, maybe that they are not really religious. They're actually pagan in the way that they think and the way that they act. Why do people hate each other? You know, the story of Cain and Abel, I think it's one of the most profound stories that the Torah gave us. And I think many times I look at Cain, and I see in him not just a petty thief or murderer. I see the first critical intellectual in history and critical philosopher, the first person to ask, well, why him and not me? And if it's either him or me, then let it be me then. You know, so it's complicated. I can't agree really that hate is only fear. I think there are a lot of things. I'm not an expert on the subject, but when I think about it, it's just, you know, I honestly go back to the Tanakh over and over, like, oh my God, those Jews in the desert, they were right all along.
And also, I think just that they need a better outlet for their passion. I mean, young people need a better outlet than hate, because, you know, as we can see, you know, and as we saw in Persia, that, you know, they have a lot of good faith and a lot of good zealotry. And if we could just, the Persian people are amazing people. I mean, they're just the nicest human beings. They make Southern hospitality look like child's play. But yeah, if we could just reharness that, it would be amazing. Anyway, thank you.
Indeed. Ariela, go ahead, jump in.
Hello, Hussein. Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. I want to thank you for the work you're doing, and commend you for sticking with it. There's a famous saying, it's not our job to finish the work, but neither can we cease from it. So I realize this may take some patience on your part, but it's very important. And you may not identify as a Jew, but I believe you're chosen, because it's very obvious that Hashem has chosen you to do something special in this world. So I was gonna mention, this is a topic very close to my heart. So I've literally been talking to my father since I was a teenager about how can we have peace with the Arab world, you know, the Jewish and Arab world. So yeah, it's been a few decades for me. But I want to remind you, I know you know this, but Abraham had to leave his family too. So you're in good company. He had to leave his family. He chose a different walk and changed the world. So that's the first thing I wanted to say to you. The second thing was, I love that you started learning about Judaism because of language study, because of studying Hebrew. I'm really happy about these new agreements that we have with Bahrain, that Israel has, with Bahrain, UAE, Morocco, and Sudan, as you were saying, because I've been part of an Ulpan out of Tel Aviv. Because of COVID-19, we were able to study on Zoom. So I was meeting with Israelis, and also we had Arab classmates, and we had classmates from the UAE and from Bahrain. I had a classmate I was very fond of named Hussein from Bahrain. And he was such a beautiful Hebrew speaker too. His accent was impeccable. You know, I would listen to him. We in WhatsApp, we had to say things and put them in the group, and I would listen and listen to him like, oh, he's got the good pronunciation. So that's a benefit of an Arab person learning modern Hebrew. And also one thing that was very touching for me was in this recent escalation with Gaza, we all still have our WhatsApp groups. All of the students still talk to each other, and to look at this WhatsApp group of mine in my phone and look at the Arab people and Jews consoling each other and saying, listen, we're both losing loved ones. You know, this is painful for both sides. It was very deep and meaningful to me to be part of a community, even if it's in WhatsApp, in which Arabs and Jews are just, you know, grieving together. We were crying together.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ariela.
You're welcome.
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead, Mom.
Yes.
Okay, this will be the last one though.
Okay. I hesitate to call you by your first name because you probably have a title like Doctor.
No, just
Doctor,
Hussein.
no.
No.
Okay. The question is, were you able to study far back in the history of the Arab and Jewish relationship, Muslim Jewish relationship, far back when we cooperated and we were welcomed into the Arab countries and the Muslim countries, and maybe you could use that connection that was there from the beginning and emphasize that in trying to influence some of the negative propaganda to disappear.
Yeah, no, definitely you're right, and that's something that we always try to remind people of, whether Jews and Arabs, and there's something very important. There are, you know, there are differences though, and those differences are important as well. That basically Jews back then, they had no power. They were just admitted as, they were tolerated as second-class citizens. And this, by the way, this is a big problem with Israel in the Middle East. It's the idea of accepting Jews having independent power over themselves. It's an evolution, it's a progress, and it's a step of growth for Muslim civilization in general to accept the fact, well, you know, Jews are not going to be your second-class citizens anymore. They will have, you know, independent power over their own selves and over their own lands. And that's something that a lot of Muslims and Arabs haven't been able to accept because just it's a break with all of their history, right? Like Jewish history started, like it's a very long history. Muslim history is 14 centuries
Right.
of power. So the fact that now you're going to share power, that's new. That never happened before for Muslims in their history. And this is why I believe that this is taking long. But still, those amazing historical episodes of cooperations are important. Thank you very much, Rabbi. Thank you, everybody, for having me tonight. It was a great pleasure to speak to all of you.
Thank you. I want to wish you a blessing before we conclude. May Hashem bless you with strength and with courage and with only peace in your life and blessings, and continue to do the good work to bring us all together. Thank you so much. Thank you for all joining us tonight. Have a wonderful evening. Take care. B'shalom.